First of all, sorry if the audio you hear is not my voice, but I don't speak your language, and so I helped myself with a digital translator, but it's the contents of what I write that count. I was reflecting on the theory, and actually put into practice in Sweden, of the herd immunity method. Certainly it is not the solution to the problem, but other initiatives from the rest of the world, and completely opposite, have not been a solution. Let's look at the statistics on how many deaths, as a function of the number of the population. So in this case the higher number that will come out will be more optimal and better than the lower number. Inhabitants of Sweden 10,230,000, and there were 6,082 deaths, so that's 1 death for every 1,682 people. Inhabitants of Italy 60,360,000, and there were 42,954 deaths, therefore 1 death for every 1,405 people, and therefore many more than in Sweden, making the correspondent with the number of inhabitants. Because in this case, the lowest number, i.e. every 1,405 inhabitants of Italy, is much worse than the highest number in Sweden, which is every 1,682 inhabitants. Because I repeat, it means that every 1,682 there was a death. While keeping in mind the example of Italy, we have that every 1,405 people, as a death occurred, and I hope I was clear. Inhabitants of France 66,990,000, and there were 42,203 deaths, so 1 death for every 1,587 inhabitants. So Sweden wins again with its choice with herd immunity. Inhabitants of Germany 83 million, and there were 11,982 deaths, so 1 death for every 6,927 inhabitants. Here Sweden loses against Germany, but Germany has never made a total lockdown, so it could be exempt from the statistics we are carrying out. Inhabitants of Spain 46 million, and there were 40,105 deaths, so 1 death for every 1,146 inhabitants. Here Sweden wins again. Inhabitants of England 55,958,000 people, and there were 50,365 deaths, and therefore 1 death for every 1,111 inhabitants. Sweden wins again. U.S. inhabitants 328 million, and there were 238,573 deaths, and therefore 1 death for every 1,374 inhabitants. Sweden wins again. So I repeat, the number of people referred to the average of the inhabitants is higher the more it is optimal, and every 1,682 people per inhabitant of Sweden are much better than every 1,146 people in Spain. So the lockdown has not solved the problem at all, but according to the numbers it would have even aggravated it, and therefore does not correct the situation at all. Even if dramatic in both the choices of governments, even if completely opposite. In summary, Germany certainly has the lowest number of deaths, referring to the number of inhabitants, but there has never been a total lockdown. While we then have Sweden with no lockdown applied, and has the lowest number of deaths, referring to the number of inhabitants. It turned out that the lockdown did not solve anything, if not inculcated the fear of governments, of not having enough beds in health facilities. But this fear of not being able to cope with the number of beds did nothing but go to peak the world economy, and a disaster will emerge, and already underway, of job losses for employees, and closure of commercial businesses, and therefore companies that enter into economic failure, with consequences that never occurred in the history of humanity. So having been too cautious cannot have done anything but obtain the opposite effect of what one would have desired or expected to happen. Judging none of the government's actions, and that everyone has chosen his own path, believing and hoping it was the right one. But now we can sum up that the attitude of Sweden, at least from the numbers of deaths, was, even if in small part, it was winning.